Baby, baby.
Welcome back, listeners. This is the NotoriousSA podcast featuring your boy, NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka Podcasting from the Closet. Significant other is currently working from home, so while she's out using the living room, I'm back here recording the closet. So if the sound quality is slightly different, that's probably why. It's kind of soundproof in here, to be honest. It's kind of nice. Kind of peaceful. It's also warm because it's super cold outside and nobody wants to go outside. Happy belated Valentine's Day to everybody. Hope everybody had something good they could do. Me and the wife went out to Seasons 52, got myself a steak and a cocktail. Everything was socially distanced and masked. It was appropriate. It was nice. It was a good time. Also this weekend, the impeachment of the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, came to a anticlimactic end on Saturday. So for the last week, the House impeachment managers have been giving us a presentation with video evidence and timelines regarding the president's speech on January 6th that led to the insurrection, the history of his speech in terms of violence, going all the way back to the start of his campaigns in 2015, the lack of condemnation for right-wing extremist groups who were participating in the riot, testimony of people in the Capitol saying they thought Trump told them to do it, and of course all the news coverage and the president's own actions regarding the day, pretty much enforcing the idea that he incited the insurrection and did very little, if anything, to stop it. This included correspondence between people in the Capitol and the White House. This included the president's public statements. This included the fact that he apparently took a call from Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, and when told that the mob was, in fact, dangerous, that they were more upset about the election than he was, implying that the president didn't really care about the lives of the people in the building, including his own vice president. Pretty damning stuff. And if most polls are to be believed, the vast majority of the American public also agrees with the sentiment that the president, the former president, played a role in the insurrection and should be convicted. Now, the defense team, which included this scrappy ragtag group of lawyers, knew that they were going to win because the Senate had openly, for one thing, questioned the constitutionality of this trial, which again is a technical argument to fall behind, and two, the fact that jury nullification, in the sense that this trial is anything like a regular court proceeding, which it's not, it's a political trial designed to remove the president in case of emergency, but it really is up to the House and the Senate to determine how that works and why. So anyone can argue the validity of any impeachment, since none of them have ever resulted in someone being removed from office, if it is in fact the kind of tool that's useful for that, but I digress. The bigger point being is that the president's defense team, regardless of the argument that they made, were going to win, in the sense that they would not reach the 67 votes needed to actually convict the president. Mostly because many Republicans either don't want to offend him, they don't want to be seen as cowering to his base, and they perhaps think it's in their best interest to not drag this out any longer, because in their minds, this is merely a show trial the Democrats are putting on, trying to link them to the insurrection and to an unpopular president, or a political tool for them to just try and ruin it for Republicans across the board going into the next set of elections. So instead of treating it like the domestic terror attack that it was, many of them saw the political calculus being that if they couldn't get enough people to convict him, they were going to hide behind the process, even though that process argument was rather weak. They just felt it was necessary. Now, of course, what this means is that over the course of the week, we had a compelling case from the prosecution and a weak argument from the defense, who in fact coordinated with people in the jury pool like the other senators, but they're not really a jury, but they are kind of a jury, so whatever. It's an imperfect analogy. Point being is that the verdict was in the bag. It was just a matter of how many Republicans could be pulled off from the last impeachment, which essentially involved 0 Republicans in the House and Mitt Romney. This particular impeachment had 10 House Republicans vote for impeachment, and in the final verdict, 7 Republicans voted to convict the president of the charge of insurrection. Now, the crazy thing about this particular acquittal is that shortly after the trial ended, you had a speech from Senator Mitch McConnell, now Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, thanks to President Trump, and he essentially argued that he had to acquit because of the timing and the process of it, which part of which was his own doing, but whatever, that's the thing that lawyers do. Now, the other part was where he said he was practically and morally responsible for the insurrection. So you have Mitch McConnell saying that for whatever reason he had to acquit the president, but assigned all blame to him and strongly hinted at the possibility of future criminal and civil liabilities. Means that his calculation was that he couldn't vote to convict because he wouldn't get enough people to side with him to make that politically viable. He then decided that the next best course of action was to acquit him, but then to ride him on a public stage in which most of America was watching, knowing that his words would be used against future Republicans who try to tie themselves to the former president. This was designed implicitly that the president's post-presidency career will not be one where he is in fact a kingmaker, but one where he continues to be persona non grata and will eventually be forced out of the public sphere or in a position where he will no longer be able to significantly influence the direction of the Republican Party. Now, that seems to be the establishment line, which is that eventually the Trump saga will play itself out in a setting where the president will continue to face severe legal, financial challenges down the way, which would prevent him in any real way, shape, or form making an impact on the Republican Party without great personal sacrifice to himself. Now, whether or not that plays out in the future, we'll see. But another part of the Republican Party essentially contends that this entire thing is a sham, that the Democrats and the House managers have doctored evidence, have essentially accused them of hypocrisy. They bring up the riots of last year, explaining that cost more lives and it cost more money, and that many of them encouraged it. Many of them were hypocrites for all of a sudden being in favor of police officers when they were essentially against them last year. It kind of boggles my mind that at a point where a domestic terrorist attack happened and many in the party believe it's in their best interest to minimize as much as possible the former president's involvement in starting it and festering it, it's sad because he doesn't care about any of them. Like, obviously. Like, he sicked a mob of people onto the building that could have 1,000% killed way more people than were actually killed. An event where police officers were killed. Some as a result of the attack, some from suicide afterwards. People were injured. Other civilians, part of the protest, died. It could have been a large mass casualty event had not some brave thinking happen on behalf of police officers and staffers who were manning the lines. Now, the fact that he doesn't care about them, like, at all, and the fact that they still feel the need to defend him really tells you that this really isn't about the man, per se. It's about attracting a kind of power that man has. He has an army of people that are loyal to him and to, frankly, him alone. Not to law enforcement, not to the U.S. Constitution, not to basic civil rules of procedure. They believe what the president tells them to. They believed Donald J. Trump, now private citizen, is one of the lone arbiters of truth in the world. How do we get to that point? How is it that what most of the world saw in summer of 2015, that same man who in reality hasn't changed at all, went from being a joke and an actor to the sole arbiter of truth for a large part of the nation? How is it that to this day, despite clearly obvious lies and selfish behavior, he still commands an army that transcends the Republican Party and our laws? How does that get to be the case? Well, that's kind of what I want to talk to you about today. Part of the reason that someone like Donald Trump can rise to power is that while he is going to be himself, and he is always going to have this particular style and few core misguided beliefs, is that power comes from being able to grab attention. Particularly in the day and age we live in a digitalized, hyper-aware, hyper-media environment where your sources of information are essentially infinite, some far more credible than others, coming from radio, television, podcasts, websites, social media. People are always constantly looking for information. And for information that's trustworthy and, unfortunately, sometimes conforms to their view of the world. Not everybody wants to find the truth. Some people want to find what they want to find, what they think the truth actually is, or what it should be. And when that happens, on a collective scale, you begin to see a mass collection of people who are on the same wavelength, sometimes about good things and sometimes about not good things, sometimes about incorrect things. Sometimes people are subject to constant bombardment of their ideas of reality because things that they've been told to trust, they don't appear to trust, and they may seem more guided not by what they believe in, but by what they are against. And if you are against the mainstream media, or the liberals, or the left, or Hollywood, you may see a champion in Trump, despite him being a product of, again, that same exact world. And despite him operating on essentially totally selfish reasons for wanting to be president, a large part of America went along with it because they saw the narrative of a successful businessman hated by the evil establishment, hated by the media, who would say false inflammatory things about him and all of his supporters. So it becomes itself a kind of countercultural movement. And then when that person becomes the president, there is a legitimate authority and office behind what this particular person is saying. Now, mind you that lots of other people have held the office of the presidency, some far less scrupulous than President Trump in some cases, and some far more honorable. But the idea that that particular office, the office of the president, is not just somebody that we think of as an administrator of a branch of government, but as a celebrity and an ambassador and a statement of the cultural values of the country in a particular moment. When you give a person like Donald Trump the power of the office of the presidency, what you've essentially done is handed over control to somebody who can't really deal with it. And the type of control that they want is not in the best interest of everybody, it's in the interest of themselves. Not just their political party, literally what do they as a person want, and will operate their entire existence around that. You know, part of the calculus for the Republican class is that Donald Trump, the person, the former president, was able to win in a unique circumstance in a unique time. Donald Trump, who already had massive name recognition, was able to identify 2 or 3 issues that he repeated over and over again, not to mention being constantly pumped into every source of information distribution everywhere. From social media to TV to the web, was in everyone's face all the time. This is something Donald Trump wants. Donald Trump wants your attention. Whether you hate him or you love him, he is all about ratings. He's all about making himself look good and getting the most amount of people to watch him doing that. Because, at the end of the day, he's a selfish man who does things for selfish reasons. He's a celebrity. He's a melodramatic. He's apparently wealthy and apparently in debt and maybe a national security threat. You know, he's a man of many traits. The big problem is that for many Americans, this man is and was their sole salvation in a world where they may not feel like they have any real control or say, because they believe that the information systems we have out there, not entirely unjustifiably so, cater to certain areas. If we were to say that New York City has more of a media influence than Kansas City, I don't think most people would disagree with that. I mean, New York is the largest city in America. It's a world-class destination where most of the media, including Fox News, the main source of conservative news in this country, is located. We have most of our technology located in San Francisco. You know, problems that have plagued humanity for a long time didn't just disappear with the rise of America, but in America, we've had silos of information, which, as we've increased our ability to communicate through, again, the internet, social media, what we found is that the conversation has become a lot larger and a lot louder. And in order for people to really have their voice heard, they may have to say things that grab headlines, because that's what they're up against. So the people who control the headlines. They'll control what information you see, and they're trying to report it as best as they can, but not everybody trusts CBS News or Fox News or ABC to be a reliable indicator of information. And in a world where we should all kind of trust but verify, we shouldn't just take any word for anything, but ideally with media organizations and people who value themselves on their ability to uncover the truth and try to give people information to make responsible decisions, that they should have high standards, and if they're going to say something, that they've done the work behind it, including the fact-checking and the follow-up and everything else. Which is hard, because that's also competing with other people are trying to get attention. They're trying to get money. They're trying to get ads. They're trying to grow. So in our marketplace of ideas, normally this would try to work itself out in the form of whoever can find the most profitable solution for it will be the one who wins. Now, that kind of disruption means that the people who become the largest purveyors of information are doing so in a way that is going to maximize their own self-interest. And some people will just say that they're giving you the unvarnished truth through their personal perspective. Some people have a political agenda behind it. Some people have a financial agenda. Some people just might be interested in actual conversations. Some people might care about the future of this country and for civic engagement. And what I thought would be helpful for people to understand how a major political party and a large part of America to support a man who so very clearly has done so much wrong and is really just not a good person. You have to understand someone like Steven Crowder. Now, if you are familiar with Steven Crowder, you might have to skip the next maybe minute or so, but if you just want a quick refresher or don't know, Steven Crowder, and to give you a sense of the bias here, I'm reading directly from the Wikipedia page. Stephen Blake Crowder, born July 7th, 1987, is an American-Canadian conservative political commentator, media host, and comedian. He hosts the YouTube channel and podcast Louder with Crowder, where he gives his opinion on socio-political issues in the U.S. and their solutions. He is also a former contributor to Fox News. Now, that may not sound like much, and of course I've only read the first paragraph, but to give you a little bit more context behind it, from the biographical information, Stephen was born in Detroit, Michigan, but lived in Canada for a while. His family moved back to Canada. He has been active in the acting scene. He's also an actor who's done voice acting and some film work since 1999. He's listed here that he does have a spouse, and his current political party affiliation is Republican. Now, that's just what you would glance from if you Googled his name and went to the top search result, which besides his website would be the Wikipedia page. If you wanted to stop the podcast right now and Google this for yourself, and check anything out before you wanted to continue, by all means, go ahead and do so. I can't stop you. I would just hope you come back to listen to what I have to say afterwards, but you'll probably get a good sense of it by the time you come back here. But to go further in, and if you want to take this moment to Google him, go ahead. I'll give you till now. You can do both, two things at once. Anyway, so he's a actor, commentator, and somebody who has a pretty active presence online, on Twitter, on Facebook, on social media, and of course on his YouTube page. Now, you may have probably seen him without knowing it, because he is the face of a popular meme, the Change My Mind meme, where you see a gentleman sitting behind a table holding a coffee mug, and there's usually a white banner at the table, and it says some sort of statement, change my mind. That is a segment that Steven Crowder does, where he goes to college campuses mostly and states a position on something, either more guns equals more safety, or you have to be pro-life, or America is not racist or male privilege is a myth. You know, generally kind of provocative ideas, and with the concept being that he'll talk to you and you have the ability to change his mind. Now, how often does he change his mind? You can factor that by watching it. But generally, these are actually interesting segments because he is a respectful person and he's got research behind what he does, and he talks to people who just, show up. And some of them are more prepared than others, and some are not prepared, and some are just, angry, and they get a rise out of it. And that's kind of part of the game, which is to be the more respectful person and get a rise out of somebody else. Now, this can often result in, people freaking out, and they use these clips as a way to cater to a specific audience, usually of younger, more conservative men. Feminist triggered or SJW triggered, that type of stuff. Which in some cases there's some funny ones out there. Other ones, cringy, which I guess cringe in itself is a form of entertainment. But what are you going to do? Now, this type of entertainment does have a value in that, again, through the power of the internet and social media, as I heard in a song once, if you're 1 in 1,000 in terms of someone having an interest on the internet, that's a community of 2 million people. So again, something that could be very obscure, if given the right channels to produce its information, could find a very large collective audience in a way that maybe wouldn't have been covered before. The idea is that this particular type of humor and these particular type of ideas, there's an audience for them. There's always going to be an audience for something, for the most part. And one of the things about that made the internet what it is, which is arguably one of the best things that's ever happened to humanity, and also one of the worst things that's ever happened to humanity, is the ability to provide uninterrupted, unfiltered communication between people all over the world, including our elites and our media figures. And for a lot of people, this has been an opportunity to build these different channels to tell the people the world as they see it and the facts as they find them. Some people do it for comedy. Some people do it for ads. Some people do it just because they can. It's part of what makes the internet in America such a great place in general. And I will tell you, Steven Crowder loves America. And I mean loves America. And this is coming from somebody who loves America. This guy loves America. I do not question Steven Crowder's patriotism in any way, shape, or form. And I believe him and I have similar taste in American flag apparel. So, good for you, man. All for you on that one. Now, the problem I have with Steven Crowder is that it's okay to live in this ecosystem of triggering people and providing your perspective on the news and giving a conservative Christian atmosphere or a more pro-America version of what you believe that Hollywood and the media don't cover. Totally okay with that. In fact, that's largely been part of the mainstay of the conservative movement, was this kind of separate world from maybe the other parts of the mainstream that promoted things that they disagreed with and didn't want to hear about. Now, the problem with Steven Crowder is that, and if you didn't know this, you might be shocked, but he's actually a big fan of President Trump. Big fan. Whether it's the way that he speaks or his policy positions, you can definitely find a lot of pro-Trump material throughout Steven Crowder's video commentary. Now, in regards to the most recent election and the terrorist attack that happened on January 6th, what I will tell you is that I was following Steven because I have this thing where, again, I like to watch cringe, and frankly, a lot of the show is pretty cringy sometimes. Sometimes it's the off-color jokes or the blatant inappropriate attitudes sometimes, but, that's part of the shtick. That's who he is, and that's the humor he goes for, and, some people enjoy it. Not everybody does. But since the election, which, if you watch his pre-election coverage, where he talks about why he believes Trump is going to win and giving the factual assertions behind it, he very much dove into the conspiracy theories around the election. And, in the immediate aftermath of the election, when you were looking to Trump's defenders to justify his obviously wrong and incorrect statements about him winning and election fraud and all of that, he was a big proponent of digging into all of the cases and the affidavits filed by the Trump legal team, essentially taking them at face value, despite the ludicrous scenarios and the typos and the fact that some of these things were never even filed, and the things that people said weren't even factually correct or didn't make sense or were retracted, and none of them were used in actual court proceedings. He essentially goes on to say that all of this evidence that they've presented is true, and no judge is taking it seriously because the system, I guess, is corrupt. You can watch all of it. There's multiple cases. They did a whole fraud week. You can look it up. Frankly, it's just them repeating the things that Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell have said. These, frankly, bullshit arguments about statistical anomalies and states changing their own laws and not being able to actually do so, and it all being unconstitutional, and trying to factor all these votes. It's a very complicated way of trying to say that I am mad Donald Trump lost, and again, I am going to do everything in my power to either help him win illegitimately or delegitimize the incoming administration. Now, if you haven't Googled him yet, there's this particular soundbite I wanted to cover from his show today, February 15th. Where he talks about, well, you know what? I'm just going to play the clip, and it's him talking with his friends, and then we'll go for it from there.
Violently and patriotically means lynch black people. So now you understand.
That's what I heard.
I rest my case, Your Honor.
Dog whistle.
Wow, I didn't see that.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm a victim of this.
No, and then
editing.
he tweeted it out. He tweeted it. What is wrong with me today? He tweeted out later. He said, "Hey, you have to go home." And then in the video saying, "All right, you need to go home now." So I'm saying, what more can you do other than ensuring peacefully, patriotically? And what the House Democrats, what they said was, he only said that twice, whereas he used words like fight or stolen election 11 times. This is what this is all about, okay? They want everyone, and it's the YouTube policy where you can talk about voter fraud. You can talk about voter fraud occurring, but you cannot say that voter fraud had any effect on the outcome of any American election, or you will get banned. This is about banning people for wrong speak. They want you to believe that if you are suspicious of 150,000 vote dump, 99% for Biden in the middle of the night, that if you're suspicious of that, because that's never occurred anywhere else in the modern democratic world, that you are encouraging violence. They are punishing Donald Trump because they are saying that talking about election irregularities is effectively a call to violence, and they want you to know that you could be criminally charged if you are in any way suspicious of the election. So I don't know if
you'll be cyber assassinated, won't you?
I guess what they're going to Minority Report Jimmy Carter, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, because they sent letters to the parent company of Dominion saying our election security is at risk. Jimmy Carter said it was the greatest threat to our national security and to democracy was the digitizing of our elections. He wrote a letter outlining it with his commission, his Election Integrity Commission. So this isn't a partisan issue.
Well, and Donald Trump said something I think that was instructive there too. He not only did he say peacefully and make your voices heard patriotically, the entire summer he had been saying we are the party of law and order. He ran on that.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to pull clips of what he said during a tumultuous time, we are the party of law and order. We are above this, all this stuff. Party of law and order, right? I'm going to make sure law and order is taken care of. He said people that were slated illegally. He believed that states did things that were illegal, and therefore their slate of electors were not legitimate.
Right.
That's it. He can be wrong.
Right.
About that. Right.
Well, I don't think he's wrong.
But that is, I agree. But I'm saying he has a right to be wrong. In that
he has a right to be wrong.
Pennsylvania did something
at
wrong.
No point could
and that's
you
not inciting.
At no point could you. Donald Trump didn't lie about anything.
No.
Donald Trump believes what half of the country believes, that there are voting irregularities, that when you look at what happened in the election, this has never happened before, that more, and something, these are all verifiable facts, that more election laws were changed in this last election than any election preceding it, that for some reason we still don't have the balance sheets, right? We still don't have the voter rolls balanced.
The Democrats were using the exact same language in 2016.
Yeah, exactly.
And they held on to it for, was it 3 years?
Now, the context of this clip being that they're talking about his particular opinion on the articles of impeachment against the president. Stephen Crowder and his crack team of non-constitutional experts say that because the president said peacefully and patriotically, jokingly it was interpreted into lynching people. And he proceeds to then go on and explain that this really isn't just about Trump, it's about questioning these particular irregularities he keeps mentioning. Now, when he speaks, he's not going to use the phrase stolen election like Trump, because that's a one-way ticket to getting booted. He says the phrase voting irregularities consistently, and when talking about said voting irregularities, he puts up links on his website. And I decided, just as a matter of, following up on his research, to see exactly what he was saying. And frankly, what I found was that, amazingly enough, his crack team of fact checkers wasn't able to actually get pretty much any information correct. One example that I'll give you, he mentions in the state of Michigan that people were mailed ballots without first applying for them, only to provide source material which states that the state of Michigan sent out mail applications to voters to apply to get a ballot to vote. Now, despite it being so on his website and listed in the show as saying that the article says that ballots were sent to voters without checking, his own source material says that those were applications for ballots, which is not the same thing as an actual ballot. The same way that applying for a job is not the same way as having a job. One wouldn't think that that's necessarily too hard to fact check, but when you're the crack team over at Louder with Crowder, and you're trying to convince everyone that the election is being stolen out from underneath Trump, you'll cling to anything that you can. Now, imagine a whole episode that sounds like that, because that's pretty much what it is. But as you'll notice there, he said that Trump never lied about anything. And Trump believes what he says when he says that the election was stolen. Now, this is a key point here, is that despite the fact that Crowder and his crew are fans of Trump, voted for Trump, and Trump's own government, picked with Trump's people, have said that the election was secure, he continues to doubt them and trust the president and his obscure legal team making absurd claims that he takes at face value in order to be true. And notice he talked about the vote dump in the middle of the night, which, again, is not a conspiracy in any way, shape, or form. It's just the result of buildup of data that eventually was inputted. They take these things that are... Some of it is based in some form of truth, such as that states have changed their rules to make it easier to vote during a pandemic. Now, he won't ever talk about the state of Texas, which did the same thing, but he'll talk about the swing states that Joe Biden won and the states that the Trump campaign was targeting. Curious how he wouldn't follow up, but whatever. What do I know? Now, the problem here is that despite the fact that it's been covered in court and covered in the media, I want to let people know, if they listen to Steven Crowder, if they have any kind of idea that the election is in any way, shape, or form in question because of quote-unquote irregularities. So, the first thing I'm going to point out is that in Trump's government, in the Department of Homeland Security, the Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, said that this was the, quote, most secure election in history. Of course, that led to one of Trump's own appointees, Chris Krebs, being fired because he disagreed with the president and told the truth. Now, Attorney General Bill Barr would later go on to point out that there were no accusations of fraud large enough to overturn the election, but in case you're looking for a more, neutral arbiter here, the Trump government invited the Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe, or the OCSE, as part of an international team to help observe our elections. And this isn't new. This is something that's been going on since 2002, and they were invited at the behest of Trump from Mike Pompeo in the State Department. In their own reports, they have said that the U.S. election was both, quote, free and fair, along with competitive and well-managed, while finding no widespread voter fraud. So, we gotta ask ourselves here. So, despite the fact that there's clearly so much evidence in one direction here, why would somebody whose whole goal is to provide an unvarnished truth just verbatim repeat lies that they could easily fact-check? And particularly when a comedic show has a series of links and fact-checks, why would they not follow up on this? Obviously, because at a certain point, they became one of the last refuges of Trump defenders going to the end. And I would hope that after the insurrection that Steven Crowder's crowd would, take a minute to reflect on the fact that they spread lies and misinformation, and that helped contribute to the insurrection at the Capitol. But no, you would be wrong. While they have condemned the attack, they don't really treat it as a 9/11 style attack, more so as it was a bunch of idiots going onto the Capitol and messing around with stuff. The problem here is that people like Crowder, whether he intentionally believes it or is just doing it for views and money, is giving the impression that, again, Donald Trump is the sole arbiter of truth, even when it's his own people that he's picked in the government that they voted for say that he's wrong. They still stand with Trump, a man who is known to lie repeatedly. Despite, as Steven said, Trump hasn't lied about anything. He's lied about almost everything. So why wouldn't he lie about wanting his supporters to be peaceful and patriotic? Particularly when he's condoned violence multiple times. Like, Trump actually cares about the safety of people or America itself. He doesn't. He cares about himself, and if what he wants lines up with what's in America's interest, then maybe we have a shot at something, but otherwise, it's going to be all about Trump. And it's sad because, when you have a venue like this, and when you have, at least in my mind, when you see a channel like his where he's self-sustaining through selling memberships and is able to go to college campuses and have engagements with people and has some sketches that aren't that funny, to be all honesty, but, it's his business. He's allowed to do what he wants. But I had recently heard that he's considering running for governor of Michigan because he's not a fan of the current governor, Gretchen Whitmer. And mind you that if he does decide to run, as someone who has a little bit of experience in the political scene, Someone like that, who openly wears guns and bulletproof vests and basically has become an ardent supporter of Trump, is not going to be in a good position going forward, because what no one who loves Trump so much seems to understand is that they can never be like him, and they can never earn his true and undying respect, because he can't respect people, because part of Trump's appeal is the fact that he only cares about himself, in that he's had an entire career based on developing that personality, whether it's from The Apprentice or The Roast or being on SNL or being a commercial name for years or being in the tabloids or being pumped up by the news media for ratings. Donald Trump's appeal is in part due to Donald Trump, the person, being who he was before he was president. And the idea that somebody else could just simply emulate that and pull that same kind of style together and run against an equally unpopular opponent to Hillary Clinton is, sad to say, not exactly the best case scenario. And now, in the event of his acquittal, what we're seeing is the state GOP's censuring Republicans who voted to convict the president in the House and Senate. We're seeing primary challengers start to pop up who claim to be as pro-Trump as possible. And we're also seeing the vast majority of the American public souring on Trump and the Republican Party. But the Republican Party and so-called conservatives continue to latch onto him. Partly because they're scared of his voters, partly because they want to ride the wave of his voters, and partly because many think that they could be the one to fill his shoes. Many people who want to be some sort of countercultural force to what they perceive as the Hollywood, liberal, New York media elite and represent real America believe that somehow Donald Trump is a champion of those virtues. And you know what? He's a champion of grievances and of not understanding how government works. And frankly, a complete betrayal of all the standards conservatives used to have. You know, it says a lot when more senators vote to acquit Trump in an insurrection trial than vote to convict Bill Clinton in a trial about lying over a blowjob. You know, it says a lot about the character argument that it used to matter that the character of the person in that office was good, but then it didn't matter because what we're up against is so bad that the character of the person doesn't really matter. And in fact, Donald Trump may only be the only person uniquely qualified to be in this position to fight against those that they perceive as ruthless and hate America and hate who they are and hate their religion and hate their race. Which, why they're so afraid of all of them coming after them, I'm not entirely sure. Keep in mind that I mentioned earlier that Steven Crowder had been on Fox News. Now, it turns out that he wasn't exactly popular at the network, with some of his colleagues saying that he was, quote, never that funny and crossed the line more than once, with others saying that while the show he has now isn't overtly white nationalism, it caters pretty close to that. And you know what? It's a bunch of crude jokes. It reminds me a lot of a high school cafeteria conversation between guys trying to one-up each other in terms of the edginess of what they're trying to say. And, you know, I'm sure there's an audience for that, because there always will be, but in terms of him being an important political actor and a voice in the conservative movement, which he has, from speaking at CPAC to being a main staple of college campuses to having a major talk show online which hosts senators and attorney generals and presidential candidates, you know, he has effective tools, and he's learned to use the internet in a way to benefit himself financially and to provide his vision of the world that people can pay to see if they want to. And you know what? That's the beauty of the capitalist system, is that you get to do that. He gets to make money by trolling liberals, and good for him. The problem, though, is that when people like Steven Crowder, who, are essentially there for the lulz and claim to have a political agenda behind them or to speak up for so-called conservative values, that's not really what it's about. Right? It's about somebody who is trying to lash out at the institutions that they themselves were unable to change or felt victimized by. Now, why Trump, being the epitome of all things that is getting away with the system, somehow being against the system because people in the establishment didn't like him, is truly a real curveball, but this isn't the future. I mean, just think about this for a second. Right? Now, I know the mass majority of the Republican Party at this moment still says that Trump should be the leader of the party. This is despite the fact that every objective number involving Trump has been bad in terms of the number of policies he's enacted, court cases he's won, seats that his party's lost, and of course, the strength of his own loss. Now, to cope with that, it's much easier to say that you were cheated than you lost the intellectual battle of the election. Why admit that an unpopular, polarizing president who messed up the response to the pandemic would lose by so many votes, particularly when they, updated the voting rules to make it easier to vote in a pandemic by doing things that people have already been doing, like voting by mail, while only questioning certain states that voted for Joe Biden and not for Trump, that have some of the same rules. It's patently obvious that the goal here of Trump and Trumpism isn't so much the man, but it's using him as the vessel for grievances against their perceived wrongs. People like Crowder and those in the conservative infotainment industry, the PragerUs, the Turning Point USAs, are all trying to sell the idea that everyone else is out to get you, and that the only way you can fight back is by supporting them or supporting the political candidates that they prefer. And in this case, it's an undying devotion to Trump. This stereotypical rich white dude who was a baller and does things for the lulz and is totally unqualified for his job. There's always been kind of an anti-intellectual movement in America, and sometimes that results in swings being taken at the elites who may be full of those said intellectuals. Because Donald Trump is nobody's idea of an intellectual, and he's nobody's idea of a common man either. He's just a run-of-the-mill, wannabe mobster from New York City, pandering to people who want to hear and feel anger. They want to feel justifiable rage. They want to feel like they are the victims, because if they are the victims, they no longer have to face criticism. And when things don't go their way, they can blame the system. They can blame voter fraud. They can blame lies. They can blame irregularities, to the point where it becomes a standard talking point across almost the entire GOP, down to every level, even in places where the GOP was there and worked and did everything normally. Like me. Like the GOP election judge, who worked on these machines and saw what they did. And there was no corruption. And these people just lie, and they undermine confidence for other people who may not know. And then sure enough, what happens is that the Republicans lose the Senate because people didn't vote because they thought the system was rigged. Now, I wouldn't call myself a political mastermind by any stretch of the imagination, but the strategy of saying everything is rigged and convincing people that the only way to win is through an undemocratic way of throwing out the popular vote, you're not exactly trying your best to win the voters. Not to mention the fact that if one of Trump's positives was activating people who previously didn't vote, he was also able to depress people who don't normally vote, people that were needed for Republicans to take control of the Senate, or keep control of the Senate. And I gotta tell you, the fact that they were able to win because of Trump throwing them all under the bus, and then to still defend him really says that people are so concerned with what they are afraid of that they really have put all their faith in a man they don't understand. Have you ever watched The Dark Knight and thought to yourself, why would anybody work for the Joker? This is probably it. Some combination of craven opportunism or true belief in the insane. And who am I to judge Steven Crowder? I'm just some guy with a podcast talking about other people with podcasts in this great infinite podcast universe. But the idea that someone like Steven Crowder is a major voice among young conservatives and that, being able to effectively call out things like the New York Times and the 1619 Project and the San Francisco City School Board and all the other problems that people have with the so-called left and the progressive bubbles. When you tie yourself to such an obvious lie for someone who is an obvious liar, you're not doing yourself any favors in terms of advancing your so-called conservative ideas, right? The idea of America being this truly special place in the world or a free market or anything like that, particularly when you were indulging somebody who, as much as you would love to say was engaging in free speech, he was lying for a material benefit, which was the office. And if you lie for a material benefit, that's not protected under the First Amendment. That's fraud. Not to mention when you encourage violence, that's not protected under the First Amendment either. So if you're lying materially for a tangible benefit and using and encouraging violence to do so, what does that make you? It makes you an insurrectionist. Literally the best argument that they have could probably be that Donald Trump was careless with his words and some people got carried away. But every action he took afterwards, the tweeting at people, the subtweeting Mike Pence, the not sending in reinforcements to help, all of it is to conclude that Donald Trump never took the things that really mattered seriously, and all he ever really cared about was himself. And the fact that someone like Steven Crowder and other people in the conservative infotainment industry for weeks and for months covered every detail and gave some sort of credibility to his lies, fed into the narrative that this election was somehow illegitimate or stolen, despite it being the safest election and most legitimate election ever by Trump's government that he picked, that people voted for, and then turned on because Trump turned on them because they said the opposite of what he wanted. Which should tell you something when somebody that you like picked somebody that you agree with, and up until the second it was convenient for them, turned on them, and those people follow immediately without questioning, it should tell you something. A lot of people, like Steven Crowder and other people in the conservative entertainment info complex, thought that Donald Trump would be a one-way ticket to stardom, that they could be the truth tellers that people would come to on Fox News or other news sites, that they could get people in the administration to join them and give their ideas credibility. But guess what happened? Lindsey Graham was right. Donald Trump has destroyed the Republican Party. He's destroyed any basis for them to critique the Biden administration. He's undermined us in the eyes of the world. He's poisoned millions of people with the belief that this government is illegitimate and the election was stolen off of false information. And all of these people who are responsible adults who should know better pandered to him and catered to him and said, well, if he believes it, then it's not a lie. Which flies into the whole face of the idea that facts don't care about your feelings. And the idea that we're going to cater to this man when all you do is talk about catering to the people on the left in defiance of objective reality, you're doing it for Trump. You're literally changing the definitions and lowering the standards for a man that you know is not qualified for this because you want power. because you feel powerful with him in charge, you feel a connection, and at the very least, you know he's going to go after people that you don't like. That's not a winning strategy. Which is why the Republican Party's current means is to try to make it harder to vote or easier to overturn election results. So instead of taking advantage of this massive increase in voter turnout and try to save some people left, they just want to make it hard for people to vote, which would hurt their own voters. You know, you think that people, especially in like the political world, would have some sort of rational survival instinct. But instead, it's become this self-feeding loop where in order to advance in the Republican Party, you have to be in support of Trump, but being in support of Trump makes you unpopular with the American electorate and makes you likely to lose. Unless you live in a gerrymandered system where you can win anyway, or you have just enough luck to squeeze past a Democratic opponent in a swing state. And on top of that, the way our system is set up, which is disproportionately advantage to Republicans based on the Senate and the way that the House districts are drawn, you have a real potential for these people to stick around and cause trouble for everyone else. You know, we have no idea when the census information is going to come out and when the districts are going to be redrawn. But if they're redrawn in certain ways, you know for a fact that it's only going to get worse. They're going to draw people out of existence that are problematic. Or they're going to try to, make it harder for Democrats to have any representation. And statewide, they're probably going to do everything they can to try to depress the vote again in 2022. And if Donald Trump is still the figurehead of this party, what you have is a party that's dedicated to spreading lies, to suppressing the vote, and to supporting a man who does not care about any of them. So what do you do? What do you do with a problem like Steven Crowder? What do you do with a problem with Republicans who are catering to people who should not be catered to? What you have to do is ask people questions. Simple questions, ones that don't have to be complex, ones that don't have to get into nuance. All you have to say is, who won the 2020 election, and was it free and fair? I got that from The Bulwark, from JVL's newsletter, The Triad, which if you haven't checked out The Bulwark, you should. Great stuff. Check it out every day. Check out their podcast every day. But in an email, he said every Republican should be asked who won in 2020 and was it free and fair. Because anything besides Biden and yes is unnecessarily complicated or a lie. And if you're able to basically eliminate right off the bat and say, you know what? Hey, you know what? Biden won and it was fair, and that's Trump's fault for not doing more to reach out to people. That's a different ballgame. That forces you to analyze, where did you fall short? Where did you miss opportunities to reach out to voters? But by saying it was stolen, you never have to actually examine what you did wrong. Because you were cheated, and therefore you can't ever really prove that it was my irresponsible policy positions or mishandling of everything that cost me the election. It was stolen. And the idea that they say that half the country feels the way that he feels, particularly when he lied about it, A, half the country does not feel that way, and B, if they do feel that way, it's because he lied about it. And that means half the country is wrong. If half the country said gravity didn't exist tomorrow, it doesn't mean gravity no longer exists or existence of gravity is up for debate. It just means that half the country is either misinformed or lying. Fact is, majority of people believe that the election was safe. Fact is, the vast majority of people believe Trump did not handle it well. And the vast majority of people believe he's responsible for the insurrection. And you can bet for years to come, anytime the Democrats want to hammer away at the GOP and win key swing districts and even swing states, they'll have hours of archival footage of people trashing the Capitol side by side with people defending Trump. And it won't even be like the category of a swift boat attack, because it'll all be true. Because it's surprise, surprise, if you give the vast majority of people the vast majority of the correct information, the majority of them will probably come to the correct decision, which is that Donald Trump helped lead a violent insurrection against the Capitol, in part by people like Steven Crowder, who spread his lies and misinformation. And you know what? I don't care that he picked a fight with some other dude on Fox and called it some gay names, or names derogatory to him based on his sexual orientation. I care that he's spreading lying information about America's voter systems. I care that he blindly follows a man who is not to be trusted. A man who, according to his own definition of conservative values, violates almost every single standard. But because people like Steven feel that the system is out to get them, they will support a man who will cause nothing but problems for us. And again, everyone knew in 2015 who Donald Trump was. He didn't change. He didn't become less racist or less irresponsible. He became more powerful. He commanded every line of attention he could. He picked fights with every media outlet. He created infighting among his own advisors. He raised millions of dollars and used it on his own family, used it on his own expenses, and when he lost and couldn't come to terms with it, he helped lead an insurrection against a co-equal branch of government. Make no mistake that Donald Trump is going to go down as arguably the worst president in American history. And we thought we may have lived past the age of seeing the worst presidents in American history, but we did, folks. If you lived from 2017 to 2021, you will get to tell your children about the worst presidential administration ever. And I'm not saying that because that good things didn't happen. The First Step Act, the tax cut bill, certain tough stances on China and Iran. But that's not what we're going to remember. No one's going to remember those things. They're going to remember the pandemic. They're going to remember him telling you to inject bleach. They're going to remember him lying about the election. And they're going to remember his people wearing his merchandise, storming the Capitol and killing police officers. That's what's going to be left for Donald Trump's legacy. And people try to whitewash that or defend it or say Trumpism can be done without Trump, just don't seem to understand. Donald Trump was tried and failed. People like Steven Crowder, who continue to push this narrative that Donald Trump is somehow the wave of the future, are a detriment to the Republican Party and the conservative movement, and frankly a detriment to the idea of truth in general. I have a feeling he'll probably never listen to this or care. And I'll have you know, Steven, that if you are listening, I do watch your show pretty frequently. I'm not a fan of everything. Some stuff is definitely better than others. If you ever want to talk about it, I know you're one to engage in conversation, so if you ever wanted to talk about it, just feel free to let me know. I'll come on your show. I don't care. Because you're wrong. And I will say, I know you recently said you stopped caring. That's pretty much how I felt too. Because once you've launched an insurrection against the U.S. government, you're no longer allowed to let it go. I like to think that in due time, years from now, President Trump will be like a bad relationship we remember. And while he should face criminal charges in the future, and hopefully will, the question is, how long can someone like this have influence over one of the major political parties? Will they continue to lose elections? Will they continue to lose enough elections for it to matter? I have no idea. All I can tell you is here in Illinois, we used to have a governor, a federal senator, more congressional reps, more state reps, and more state senators who identify with the GOP before Trump was president. Since then, the party's gotten Trumpier and smaller, and therefore it becomes a self-destructive loop of people who want power doing things to lose power and then blaming them, being Republicans who are rhinos and the left, on losing, thus cementing the need for more extreme overreactions. And you have this very bad cycle where state and local party chairs are in the position of censuring adults who made a bold decision to convict a president who was guilty of a crime that he obviously did. It seems backwards, but either this will fade away in time, Trump will become so toxic that they'll be forced to abandon him, or the party will lose. People will splinter off. People will prevent the GOP from becoming a majority party ever again. Whether that's by voting for Democrats or moving enough support for them to never be able to truly win. They always think that if we just have power one more time, we'll be able to hold on to it forever. But that's not how it works. That's not how it's supposed to work. People like Steven Crowder talk about the virtues of freedom in America, but support a person who doesn't. Why? Because they believe that either they can control him, or that he has their interest in mind, or at the end of the day, he's just a troll who's out there for the lulz because nothing matters. At the end of the day, that's all they really care about, is the lulz.